So we're back for another episode of Kundalini Without the Cult with Guru Singh. And
and
today we're gonna
and Tiaga Prem.
and me, Tiaga Prem. And today we're gonna talk about living outside of normal. And before we talk about what is normal and what does normal mean, I pulled up a passage from some of Aldous Huxley's writing that I think you would find entertaining and also a good launch pad, as we were saying before we started recording for our conversation. Not lunch, but
Yeah,
launch.
yeah,
Okay, so here's this. These are the words of Aldous Huxley. Really felt like they aligned and were resonant for the conversation we're going to have today. This is what he wrote. The real hopeless victims of mental illness are to be found among those who appear to be most normal. Many of them are normal because they are so well adjusted to our mode of existence, because their human voice has been silenced so early in their lives that they do not even struggle or suffer or develop symptoms as the neurotic does. They are normal, not in what may be called the absolute sense of the word. They are normal only in relation to a profoundly abnormal society. Their perfect adjustment to that abnormal society is a measure of their mental sickness. These millions of abnormally normal people living without fuss in a society to which, if they were fully human beings, they ought not to be adjusted. Aldous Huxley.
yeah. And I would like to say that those that are struggling are the ones that have a portion of their consciousness that is daring to live in an exceedingly self-fulfilling way. And because they exceed the normal boundaries, they're struggling because they have a dichotomy that's taking place within themselves between the desire to be the self and an unconscious desire to fall into line because they have been trained to do so. And so I think that that is a summary of our dear friend Aldis's words, in that the ones that appear to be struggling, even the ones that appear to be, having psychotic breaks and split personalities and borderline and all of these so-called diagnoses, most of these people fall within the category of the natals, which are the category that is more evolved than those that are enforcing normal and those that are, what would be the right word, obedient to normal. I find the ones that are obedient to normal are, for the most part, embryos. Those that are striving to enforce normal are the fetals. And those that are struggling are early stage natals that are struggling between the inner urge to be the self and to be the self's mission and the self's purpose, and the external enforcement of this is what is normal. And by the way, that's why the majority of highly successful individuals are either high school or college dropouts, because the educational system, although there are some glorious exceptions, a large part of the educational system is just a normalcy reinforcement system.
Yeah, we've reflected a bit about that. Um, I have a daughter who's 12, and for those of you who don't know, and she is a basketball fiend like her dad. She really like wants to play basketball, but there's also some question as to like whether the systems that are in place as far as education are concerned are serving her. And then there's this dilemma, and I'm sure other listeners can relate to this if you have kids who are in school, where it's like she wants to play sports and school is the place to do that. And then there's some question as to whether the system is serving her in like revealing herself, kind of to paraphrase what you were saying, like the revealing of the self. And then as a parent, it's like, what do you do with that? Like, you don't want to remove her from the system because then you take away her passion. But at the same time, you don't want to feel like there isn't any other option. It's sort of a strange place to be in. So I wonder if you have any insights on that. I think others could relate, especially after all we've been through since 2020 and the changes in our world, and wondering, how much do you participate in the system and how much do you remove yourself from the system? How much do you get involved and be a part of the change within the system? And how much do you start something new? I mean, I know there's a lot in there, but wonder if
Yeah.
anything comes up.
Yeah. I would say it's a couple, three options here. Number one, athletics for teenagers is like super important. Both of
Mm-hmm.
our children were star athletes, like your daughter, and star athletes because we encouraged them and we um, got them so that they were able to really develop their skills to a state of excellence. And so, what you want to do is you want to see, are there sufficient and high quality enough club teams outside of the school system to be able to support that desire, that athletic desire. And if there are, then you have some options. You can either continue in the school system, go to the private school system, or go to the homeschool system. If there are not sufficient club teams, then my strong suggestion is to have deep conversations and off time education while you leave your children in the school system where they're being sort of like job trained rather than educated. But because the school system has the athletic component that will fulfill that aspect, which is an extremely important aspect. One of the things, especially in the case of girl athletes, one of the things that I found in our daughter, because she was a multi sport athlete and then at a certain stage had to focus on track and field. Um, but at any time, she was always playing, off campus sports, pickup games, etc. And one thing that she did not get engaged in was the frivolity of teenage sexuality. And because her relationship with both girls and boys was a joyously competitive rather than a sexually admirative relationship. I can remember one time she got a phone call and her girlfriend sitting next to her, she got a phone call from a guy in school who wanted to know some information about a homework, and the girl sitting next to her at our house was just all giddy because this guy was, a popular guy, and Huddy Perk turned to her and said, Get a grip. She says, she says, I've got a better jump shot than he does.
Yeah, we definitely have some of that here with my daughter. She's like, yeah, I could take him 1v1.
Yeah, right
Like,
on.
cool. That's
A-
awesome.
And so what I would suggest in that second case of there's not sufficient or high enough caliber club teams for the sport in your area is that you would then say, okay, well, we're going to go to school in order to get the sports and also in order to get the socialization. And then we're going to do some off campus homeschooling in addition. So it's a step up kind of moment where the parents really have to, like you and your wife do, really have to step up and apply yourselves to perhaps the most important thing in our lives, and that is our future.
Yeah, there's like the days of like trusting one source for anything really have come and gone. And I guess that's what we're talking about here too, is like whether it's in relationship or whether it's in government or whether it's in your like spiritual life,
Yeah,
to
religion,
religion. Yeah.
economics, politics, all of the above. Even the
Right.
courses that you would learn about in school. Do you really trust your history lessons? You know, they say
Yeah.
history is rewritten by the victor of every generation, right? And yeah, so back to Aldous, the and he's wording it very, very articulately. The ones who are the most uncomfortable are the ones who are advancing into the self sufficiency, um, self dominion, um, self sovereignty in the arena of I am who I am. And by being the I am who I am, you are the best form of Christianity, the best form of Buddhism, the best form of Hinduism, of Sikhism, of Jainism, of Zen, of anything to become the best form of yourself. Taoism, every single great master who ended up with a following was saying the same thing. You be yourself. And when you are yourself, you're way outside of normal because normal is not, normal has not drawn a line around you. The line that here we go. The line that normal normally draws, right,
uh,
is a line that is consistent and persistent with the one who is drawing the line, which is usually a group of people, right? That has oftentimes gone on for generations. And so normal gets defined in a very collective way. And it happens without our knowledge. It happens without us knowing that we're adhering to it. But those of us that have a real spur with the spirit inside of us, that real bonfire of passion, we're the ones that are always stepping outside of normal and eventually are rarely stepping inside of normal. And those of us that are able to define ourselves in public to the degree that we can fit in and not disrupt, that's a goal. In other words, live outside of normal and interface with the normal so that you don't get either targeted or excommunicated unless you want to be.
yeah, I was thinking about I might have shared this story with you at some point, but I'd heard this story about a fellow who he had like a maybe like a nervous breakdown, I guess they would call it, some kind of mental health issue that was came on suddenly, and he needed to make a shift in his life. And so he went to Plum Village in France, where Thich Nhat Hanh's retreat was, and he had a really profound life experience there, like a wake up, I guess, a wake up to step outside of his normal. And he worked for, I don't know the specific details, but essentially he worked at a place that manufactured parts for weapons, essentially for the U.S. funded by the U.S. government, some kind of job like that. That's like quite intense. And he had a ethical dilemma while he was at Plum Village. And they give the opportunity for everyone who's there to have an audience with Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, obviously, he's not in his body anymore, but at the time, he had this opportunity after his stay there. And so he went to have an audience with Thich Nhat Hanh and told him that he was going to go back to the United States and quit his job. And Thich Nhat Hanh advised him not to quit his job. And the reason he advised him not to is he said, if you're not there sharing a message of compassion and peace to the people in that workplace, then who else is going to do it? And that always stuck with me, because that's not a normal thing to do. The job is normal by some society standards, but to
Oh
try
yeah,
and make a shift that way,
the job is very normal.
you know? So I guess that's what we're talking about here when you say like still show up in the world. I always think about the Jesus teaching to be in the world, but not of the world, where you
Hmm.
know who you are, but you're not carried away by the madness of the whole thing.
Yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh is that Buddhist cooperative style of, in other words, be outstanding, but be instanding as well.
Yeah, I like that. Well said.
And as is the Dalai Lama. One of the things that the Dalai Lama said was that the greatest spread of Buddhism was caused by the Chinese invasion of Tibet because it forced all of these monks out into the world rather than cloistered in their monasteries. And so oftentimes circumstances abnormal, which is unfortunate, invasions are part of normal. History books will oftentimes be segmented from this war to this war to this war to this war, which is a part of the normalcy of where society has evolved to. And as is the economic system whereby what used to be considered a means of exchange, money, capital, is now a goal. And in the religious system, because of the fact that so many voices are now available in the world because of media, religions are sort of circling their wagons, which is an American expression of, hunkering down, gathering your forces. And so religions are becoming quite exclusive in their attitudes. And their marketing is just like the marketing for soap, new, best, best in the world, right? Religions are all claiming that their version of the pathway to liberation is the best. And so, and national attitudes, right? Americans Canadians, Europeans, French, Mexicans, you know, at a certain point in the political atmosphere, those adherents to that political system have to be voicing that our country is the best and our system is the best. And that exclusivity then creates a dramatic animosity towards immigrants. And the same thing will hold true with any other person who deviates from what one would be considering to be normal. The amount of, and I don't even know if this is the right word that I would want to use. Let me not use that word. The amount of alternate sexuality to the normal heterosexual attitude is not more prevalent in today's world than it ever has been throughout history. It's just more noticeable in today's world because people are becoming courageous enough to expose, they call it coming out. And social media is communicating it. And so the deep down alternatives to normalcy have been around forever. Anyone, obviously, in centuries past that was against normal politically were deemed an anarchist.
Mm-hmm.
And they were punished as such. Anyone religiously that was against normal was called an atheist. And they were punished as such. Anyone who was an alternate to normal sexually was called a deviant. And they were punished as such, and still are in many parts of the world. These things are still going on in many parts of the world. And then you see the politics globally now are trying again to recontrol that which is getting outside of the reach, shall we say, of normalcy enforcement. You can see in Russia, it's against the law to be a certain way politically, to be a certain way religiously, to be a certain way sexually. America is going that direction. The United States is going that direction. Other nations are going in opposite directions and opening up more to the unnecessity of normalcy. But the reason that certain countries, and right now, the most powerful countries are in that state of becoming very authoritarian in their approach to these circumstances of normal. And the reason that this is because now is a time when normal is actually, in an evolutionary way, being shattered. That normal is going to once and for all cease to exist. And the sovereignty of the individual and the mutuality of the collective are what are going to exist going forward. And when I say the mutuality of the collective, the individuals that will be so radiantly different than each other are going to mutually collect around each other in a total state of tolerance, acceptance, and embracement. That's the future. And that being the future is extremely uncomfortable to the fetals who are the enforcers of normalcy. They're the enforcers of their form of normalcy, and they have enough power in the world that they can write the textbooks, and they can, they can control the media, etc. And they can be attempting to enforce normal. Wake up means literally to allow that which is within you to step forward and demonstrate itself to you. Who are you? Fortunately, at a very young age, I was able to step outside of normal, but I also learned at a very young age how to dance within normal to make people think I was normal,
Hmm.
you know? And then at a certain point in time, I just said, F it, because I'm not going to continue to do this dance. But then as I stepped visibly outside of normal, I also determined that I didn't want to cause unnecessary waves for which I was going to have to manage.
Right.
And that's, I think, an important component of waking up and stepping outside of normal is don't just do it to disrupt. As a
Right.
matter of fact, disrupt as little as possible, but not to the point that you'll sacrifice your own identity.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And you're the most effective to be an agent of change when you operate in that way. There's also like a compassionate way of being too, where it's like, I'm going to be myself, and I'm going to operate within what is normal and see if I can create some kind of a ripple effect to
Hmm.
shift what's normal.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been doing the same thing throughout your life. I mean, if you're inclined and it's okay, show the
Hmm.
camera your hands. I mean, like,
Oh yeah, I have
yeah, 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 yeah. I
tattoos.
mean, yeah, and it's but the tattoos are not just tattoos. The tattoos are stories,
Yeah, big time.
and every one of them has a reason for being, a part of
Mm-hmm.
your being.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy working with you, to the degree that we're in constant contact,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because both of us respect the fact that each other is becoming more and more themselves. And when you think about our similarities and our differences, it's just like a band. The
Mm-hmm.
similarity between the keyboard and the guitar
Mm-hmm.
is apparent. They're all
Mm-hmm.
playing the same song, but the differences in tone and in approach and in the way in which they add to the composition, and then take the violin and then take the wind instruments, and then take the drum. They're all playing harmoniously with each other, but they're not anywhere close to being identical to each other. And so then you expand the concept of normal away from the instrument. And that's what we have to do as a society. We have to expand the concept of normal away from the individual
Mm-hmm.
and just determine, okay, what is that individual instrument contributing to the music of the whole community, company, society, organization, whatever it might be. I've been in organizations, and I was in in and around one or more organizations for a long time, in which I was almost always uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But I remained within the organization in order because the organization had its definition of normal. And even its definition of normal was not my definition of normal. There were parts of it that were mine and parts of it that were quite contrary to mine. So I tolerated their attitude and they barely tolerated me. But I was in that organization in order to gain from that organization the teachings of Kundalini
Hmm.
and also to use what was in that organization to be a teacher to those who were attracted to Kundalini because the organization had a frequency that was being attracting people around the world. And so I used the organization for my own benefit and I didn't abuse the organization because I was different. My normal was quite different. So I was able to sit within the organization until it became ridiculous. And
Uh-huh.
I think that's the same thing that you could apply to your daughter in school or anyone's child in school. You could apply it to yourself within a church or a synagogue or a temple. You could apply it to yourself within the politics of whatever country you are a citizen of, which, by the way, is not a natural thing. It's a normal thing, but it's not a natural thing. You know,
Well said.
citizenship is
Hmm.
absurd,
Hmm.
um, except for the fact that it's been a requirement for centuries. And so now it seems like it's a natural process, um, that you're a this or you're a that or they're a this, and it's not a natural process. It's quite an unnatural process. It's
Hmm.
like you get a dog from Mexico or from England, and it's not an it's not an English dog. I mean, it may be called an English this or whatever, or
Hmm.
Chihuahua from Mexico, but
Yeah.
it is
Which you know
not.
about.
Yeah, very well. But it is not a dog of a nation state. It's a dog of the planet Earth, which we all are. We all are beings of the planet Earth. So the idea, and that's really abnormal to be talking like this. Some people
Hmm.
would call it anarchistic. Hmm?
Hmm.
Others would call it unpatriotic. And, that's all just nonsense.
Hmm. I was looking up while you're talking this quote from Krishnamurti that's in the line with what you're saying.
Love
I
him.
think you'll like this one. Yeah, me too. Here's what he said. He said, "When you call yourself an Indian or a Muslim or a Christian or a European or anything else, you're being violent. You see why it is violent?" He asked. "Because you are separating yourself from the rest of humankind. When you separate yourself by belief, by nationality, by tradition, it breeds violence. So a human who is seeking to understand violence does not belong to any country, to any religion, to any political party or partial system. He is concerned with the total understanding of humankind." And that really is what we're talking
And the
about
total
here.
well-being and the total
Yeah.
well-being of all people.
Right. And then this relates to what you're saying because it's like you're still operating in those things. Like you're still living in a place that's calls itself a country and that is governed by this body of normal people
Mhm.
legislating normalcy, and you're kind of caught up in the game, but you can see through it. And so as you said, you only let it take you so far, uh, you know, but you don't let it compromise who you are fully, because that just isn't allowed. That's a non-negotiable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you think about it, you do pay your taxes to a degree. Um, you pay your tax every time you buy gasoline for your car. It'll be
Mm.
interesting when cars are all electric, and I guess they're going to have to put a tax on electricity because they need to fix the roads, right? And that's how they fix the roads is they tax the fuel of those who use the roads. But it as you play the role of your life in whatever area you are living in, it is an old system that is antiquated and no longer working.
Mhm.
The system of politics, the system of religion is old and antiquated and no longer fulfilling. I mean, to a degree, I'm not anti-religion, but you have to be a real devotee in religion in order for it to work for you. You have to be emotionally committed to the prophet. And then it becomes psycho-emotionally and even physically a part of your world in which you are employing what you and I both know as yogis is known as bhakti.
Mm.
And that is the worship and devotion to a very awakened being. Christianity in the case of Jesus, Buddhism in the case of the Buddha, and so on. Sikhs in the case of the gurus, Hindus in the case of Krishna, Rama, Sita, and so on. And
Mm.
what we end up with in that bhakti is a tremendous amount of inspiration that is an actual physical energy inside of you, which assists us in achieving our desires, our plans, our goals, our missions. And so I'm not anti religion for those who are deeply devoted. I am saying that religion has very little value to those who are dabblers,
Yeah,
to
or
to those
using
who
it as
just
a form of control, like ways to
correct.
control and manipulate, exploit, etc.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, obviously, as the saying goes, more wars have been fought over religion than anything else in the history of the world. And so religion is oftentimes used as a control for normalcy. So again, wake up and be willing to suffer the consequences.
Interrupt this program to tell you a little bit about the 13 Moon Studio. So, the 13 Moon Studio is a community based space online where you can practice with Guru Singh and with 1,000 other members in our community. It's a great place to gain accountability in your practice, learn new techniques, and do live classes with Guru Singh. You can become a member today by going to the 13moons.studio and giving it a try. We'd love to see you there. Now back to the show. Yeah, I liked what you said about like the devoted. Uh, it's a potent thing if you're connecting with the essence of why the tradition was started in the first place. Think about
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, and I was listening to uh, an audiobook uh, by Richard Freeman, a great yogi, American guy. I think Boulder, Colorado, originally. And in it, he was talking about how in the scriptures of yoga, the yogi sees like a clod of dirt and a diamond as equal in value. And one of the things that he was talking about that I thought was really cool is he was talking about crow excrement. And he said, like, a lot of people would think about that as like being a really gross thing because, like, crows, they are scavenger birds. And so a crow's excrement would be like a really gross thing. But to a yogi, it's like brimming with life. And, and I thought, wow, that's pretty advanced practice. But I mean, I just wanted to share because that was funny, but most of all, like it's like the essence of it is the capacity to look at something like, you know, the people who are being charged for arson in LA for starting the fires, one of them saying like, "Oh, I just like the smell of burning leaves," or whatever the comment was. And when you hear that, a normal response would be like, you know, we should put him in jail or he should be killed or whatever. And then that like capacity to experience oneness is like, wow, like the system really wasn't there for this person and they have so much pain in their life that they would behave in this way, like bless them kind of a mentality. That's not normal, and they're not you're not going to be encouraged to do so um by watching normal outlets. I mean, I guess in social media you might get some of that depending on how you curate your feed, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But I do find myself in situations, whether I'm like sitting in the sauna, listening to people talking about whether it's football or politics or whatever it might be, and just getting the frequency of normal. Like there's this tendency to blame, like we need somebody to blame. And then there's also this connected to that is like, I don't do any wrong. It's everybody else does wrong kind of a mentality. And you think, wow, that's the general frequency that people are having. And I don't really think that's who they are. I think that's just like the influence of the environments that they find themselves in. Because when you do have some kind of spiritual practice, you catch yourself doing it. Like you're like,
Yeah.
whoops, that's not that's not how I wanted to show up in that moment.
Normal and familiar
Mhm.
are cousins or siblings. The thing that drives the majority of humanity to be restricted to the lifestyle that they have chosen and to not grow beyond it and not even be curious beyond it, which is, by the way, the normal attitude is to live as you are and not be curious about that which isn't what you are. That
Mhm.
is, as Aldous Huxley said, the condition of the vast majority. He said millions, I'd say billions.
Mhm.
And the reason that that is, in fact, the case is that familiarity is safety. And safety is one of the driving forces of life. Rightfully so, to the degree that it is a driving force. But ultimately, you must find your safety in knowing that you are the immortal soul.
Mhm.
And that as long as you stay on course with your sense of purpose or your sense of mission, then when life is done, you will associate with soul rather than body. So that when life is done, you don't get stuck in, in the form of a ghost, whereby your consciousness is stuck to the earth and stuck to the body of the earth, but rather you allow yourself to transcend the frequency of the 3 and 4 dimensions of earthly existence and move into the higher dimensions of that soul's existence and do so willingly rather than either refusing it and living as a ghost or following along unwillingly and not gain the full trajectory. And so it's, and as Guru Nanak said, the great master that Sikhism is all based around, and all Sikhism means is to be a student of infinity. But what Guru Nanak said was allow yourself to be dead while yet alive. And he didn't mean just lie around on your back and don't do anything.
Yeah.
What he was meaning was that allow yourself to experience the sensations of so extraordinary non-attachment that you're not even attached to your own existence.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're not attached to your own existence, just momentarily, I mean, obviously at mealtime you better get up and be attached to your existence and feed your body.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning you better be attached to your existence and clean the body and move the bowels and do all of those things that a healthy body is involved with.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that for a period of time, on a periodic basis, daily if possible, what you want to do is you want to allow yourself to go into that state of bodiless, mindless, emotionless pratyahar, and disable your attachments to anything that's going on and enable your relationship with the soul force. However you want to relate to that is up to you. If you want to think of your soul as being attached to a savior, to the Buddha, to Guru Nanak, to Lord Jesus, to Muhammad, to whoever,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. But allow yourself the time, and that is the ultimate bhakti practice. The ultimate bhakti practice of allowing yourself to be devoted to that which is beyond this everyday 3 and 4 dimensional process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then take once you've that's sort of like the bhakti 101, isn't it? To like see some quote unquote higher being, but then the advanced practices like recognizing that love that you have for that so-called higher being, for it to really be put into action, is to see that being in the heart of every being, and then everyone becomes your savior or god, or and then that's the really like abnormal way of being, is this like to be in love with everybody and see the potential of everybody. Like you were saying, Guru Nanak, I love the teaching from him where it's like even the thief or the murderer is the thief or the murderer of God. Like they're that. And man, it's a stretch to look out in the world and see everything that's happening, and to join in. I think you used the word bewilderment earlier, and I really, that struck a chord with me. But to join in that confusion or that othering, really, what we're being called to do is come back home to, like Ramdas said, we're all just walking each other home, like bringing us home to the understanding that like we all have pain and suffering, and we all have this great capacity to love and practice compassion. And that's actually the normal thing to do, is to go back to your natural state. And that's what we would call experiencing yoga.
Yeah, I would call that the new normal, right? Or the ancient normal. It's
the
definitely it's
the original normal.
the original normal. It's definitely not the normal of the mechanized world, the merchant world, the capital oriented world, the ownership world, because in that realization of reality, you understand that not only do you not own anything, you don't even own your own body.
Mhm.
Because when you die, that body gets returned to the earth. It was a rental,
Yeah, that's
and you
right.
and you got to use it for the duration of your rental.
Mhm.
But back to the point that you were making about the seeing everyone, seeing everyone as that infinite, as that God, if you will, if that word
Mm-hmm.
works for it, for the listener viewer.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the most expanded form of normal. And that's a scary normal for a lot of people. I mean, that's a forbidden, literally. That's a forbidden normal for a lot of people, especially
Mm.
people that are especially people that are fanatically one way or another, fanatic in politics, fanatic in religion, fanatic in economics, fanatic, you know, the idea economically that everyone deserves to have, their life
Mm-hmm.
is a throwback, probably more like five, 8,000 years. Not too far back, actually, when you think about, the true reality of time.
Mm.
But back in those days, nobody owned land, you know. There was not land ownership until what was called the Great Enclosure, where the most brutal of all the warriors became the monarch of a particular area and the owner of all lands in that area. But prior to that, you just wandered and you lived where you lived. You gathered your food from where you were, and if necessary or if capable, you planted food where you were, which was very much like the indigenous cultures still would be doing if they weren't all enclosed, right? In reservations, made normal.
Right.
And the exchange of goods and services was very much like what happens here in Los Angeles during this time of great catastrophe with the fires that are going on here in January of 2025. And I'm saying the date so that those who listen to this at some other time understand what I'm referring to. But
Mm-hmm.
the goodness, what you're talking about, the goodness, the love comes out of, people are contributing vast quantities of belongings to people that they don't even know because of the love in their heart triggered by the disaster and the calamity that's taking place. And so when you think about that, you think how that is such a good event, and what causes it is this incredible bad event. So the polarity to the very, very bad event is causing people to step way, way outside of their comfort normal.
Right.
And
It's
they're,
waking
and they're
people up.
waking people up. And, one of the common expressions is the reason I'm giving is because that could have been me. And I was fortunate to the fact, to the extent that it wasn't me, but I want to give to those who it was. And that expands normal for a while. You think about 9/11, and there were people all over the world saying at this time, we are all Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't take long until politics squandered that goodwill by turning the 9/11 event into an opportunity to wage war. And more than just one war in retaliation, it waged several wars of opportunity and tried to base them on retaliation. But that was seen through very quickly, that it was just a false, it was a false intention. And we have to look at the wars that are taking place today. And we have to understand that This is normal. And everything that we are feeling inside of ourselves, if you're listening to this podcast, you're either scouting it because you're trying to see what the ridiculous are talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? What the outside of normal are actually talking about, or you yourself are outside of normal and you're listening to this because it's comforting. And the reality is that if given the opportunity, nearly all of the billions of people on earth would be outside of normal. But because of the early life indoctrination happens inside the household, because the household is a reflection of what's happening outside the household, and the inside the household doesn't want to be branded as being abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, children are brought up to be a certain way, to act a certain way, to communicate a certain way, to feel a certain way. Except in those households that are more progressive and more um, freedom oriented, right? Free. Let's be free to understand what's really taking place. And so now that we have this conversation ignited about wake up and be outside of normal and embrace the normal of who you are, and then integrate that into society so that you're not excommunicated, that's an art. And it's also a science. It's a science in that if you do certain things, such as yogas, meditations, breath work, sound work, whether it's sound, listening in sound, or singing or chanting in sound, there are many ways of achieving the physical, emotional, and mental frequency of being able to honor your normal, what's normal for you, and still being able to integrate yourself into a social format so that you can have relationships, so that you can have communities, so that you can have all of those things which are also very valuable to a human existence, to an experiential existence. This is this is what, this is what we teach
Mm-hmm.
whoever we are and whatever path we're teaching. This is what we teach. This is what we exemplify, so we can teach it without actually teaching it. We can just teach it by being an example of it. So anyone who is feeling awakening, you are attracting people around you who are noticing that you're awakening, and they're admiring that you're awakening, and they want to awaken themselves. So they will form a little bit of a bhakti relationship with you. They will want to be around you. They will want to be influenced by you. And in exchange, their admiration is to never be taken advantage of
Mm-hmm.
and always honored and always encouraged. And that is how communities can wake up together. I had a I had a lady reach out to me on social media, and she's, not on social media, on a text, and she's a somewhat famous person, and we've known each other for many decades. And she said that the person that she normally stays with when she's in town for what she does has lost everything. And she was a graduate of a Kundalini training some 15 years ago. This,
Mm.
both the lady that I'm referring to and the lady that she would stay with when she was in town. And this lady that she stayed with has lost everything in the fires. And she's trying to accumulate some replacements for the manuals, for the books, for the things that were so dear to her and so dear to her lifestyle. And so this person that I know is reaching out to all of the friends that she knows. Think of this without a devastating event. Think of this as, in fact, the new normal. And the new normal bypasses the economy, not to a total degree, but to a partial degree. That we begin to exchange in ways that are not simply financially driven. That's the new normal. That we begin to worship in ways that are not specifically prescribed. That's the new normal. That we love each other regardless of whether or not we've known each other. That's the new normal. And so when you wake up and you step outside of normal, you realize that you're actually building a new normal.
And I know you've spoke about this before. When you start doing that, you're going to come up against resistance, and that resistance is your opportunity, really. Like, I was remembering that story about the young kid on the beach, and he's throwing starfish back into the ocean, and somebody comes along and they say, what are you doing? And he said, I'm saving these starfish. And then the normal person, like the grown up to the kid who's normal, says, look at all of them. You're not going to make any difference. Why bother? Which is a normal response. And the kid throws one more and says, it made a difference to that one. I love that.
I love that. Yes. Yes. And it
And
did.
that's the opportunity. It's like that resistance was the opportunity to provide a moment for awakening. And maybe that person didn't take that, awakening in the moment, and that's okay. It might come later. I definitely had moments with that with students who they are like, oh, you're always talking about God or whatever. I choose to use the word God, and it's so annoying or whatever. It really bothers them, and then they circle back like a couple years later and they're like, you know what, this thing that you said, and you don't even remember it. But the
Right, right,
point
right.
the point being that, you know it is going to feel a little bit strange to participate in that new normal. And hopefully, wisdom would be that we don't have to wait until like a big wake up call to start to live in that way. Like, we can catch it before the big wake up call. And it can just be like doing small things, like talking to the people. We just moved to a new city in the start of the summer. So we've just been here for, few months or whatever. And we noticed when we got here, like, compared to where I used to live, people are so friendly. Like, you walk down the street and people are like, hey, how you doing? Like, nice to meet you. You just moved in. And at first we were like, what do they want? Like, because we just weren't accustomed to that. Like, we lived in a bigger city and there was like, more urban environment. And then all of a sudden everybody's so friendly, and it's a small thing, but it just makes you feel good. It makes you feel like a breath of fresh air, or like going out to be in nature when you're around people who are like friendly to each other. And that could be like a simple practice that somebody could do to participate in this new normal, which would be just work on being a little friendlier. Or something I've been doing is like trying to send a note or a phone call to a friend every day that's not just like my immediate family, and just say like, how you doing? I'm thinking of you. And it's such a small thing, but man, it makes a big difference. And if I don't make that little bit of effort, then I just lose connections, and the busyness of life takes over, and you can easily fall into the, you know, the bewilderment that you mentioned. It's just like connecting to the magic or to that new normal just requires these little things that you commit, like micro habits that you commit to doing every day, and then you influence the world around you.
Yeah, I think that you're very much onto something there, and that is that in order to step out of normal into your own self, can more focus on stepping into the self than stepping outside of normal.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
part of stepping into the self is communicating with those that have related to the self,
Mhm.
friends, acquaintances,
Mhm.
and making it a point, journaling about it, and also send notes to others. I mean, journaling is sending a note to yourself oftentimes,
Yeah, I like that.
and sending notes to others. I have a few people that we have a relationship that we've agreed that we will send each other a text every morning.
Mm.
All it has to do is say good morning, enjoy your day, or it can have some greater wording, some greater expression.
Mhm.
And what I found was that that list will grow. And when it does grow, then it becomes a part of your daily practice that you sit down and you take 15, 20 minutes and you communicate specifically with each one of these people on a daily basis. And it's better than a click, so to speak, in social media
Mhm.
because it's real personal. And I find that creating that expansion of normal, I had one of the people come back to me and say, I've started this up with my children, and I've started
Mhm.
this up with my brother and my cousin. And everybody is loving it, they say. Everybody thinks it is a great idea. And it's a simple idea what you're talking about. It's a
Mhm.
simple idea. Just reach out and make that a normal thing.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, as life becomes busier and busier, the concept of normal things becomes smaller and smaller. And that's part of waking up.
That's it. I pulled up some Bob Marley lyrics. As you know, I'm a big reggae fan and think of him as one of the great prophets of our time. And this is a song called Wake Up and Live. Thought it will tie in nicely as we land this thing. And here's the lyrics to the song. He said, "Wake up and live. Life is one big road with lots of signs. So when you're riding through the ruts, don't you complicate your mind. Flee from hate, mischief, and jealousy. Don't bury your thoughts. Put your vision to reality."
I'll mention to the listening and watching and viewing audience that Tiaga Prem's daughter is named Marley, in
Yeah.
out of that love for the reggae master.
Yeah. Yeah. We need those reminders. You know, if we don't remind ourselves on a daily basis, nobody's going to do it for you.
Yeah.
And having community is really a big one. I mean, and things have changed so much since the pandemic where we went online to teaching. And I've really been moved since I came on board on 13 Moons how people make our online space feel like an in-person space. And that's part of our mission, to make that space feel like it's not just clicks, as you said, on social media. And it takes some getting used to, like any kind of new normal. But it's like anything, it's like what you put into it is what you'll get out of it. And so if you show up in a community just willing to connect and learn about people and to serve and to share, and you're going to have that reflected back to you. And I feel really grateful to watch 13 Moons, the community blossom, and to find people who are willing to, okay, I live in the UK, or I live in China, or I live in Canada, or the United States, or Mexico, or Chile, or the Philippines. Some of our teams from the Philippines. Um, it's amazing to see people come together in those spaces and learn to relate to each other in a um, new normal, or a return to self community that's happening online. And so if you're not aware of it, we have this great space called the 13 Moons. You can check it out at the 13moons.studio. And Guru Singh is on there. I'm on there. Our team's on there. And a global community of folks are on there. And it's pretty special.
It reminds me that normal is like so called the law, and honesty is what makes one feel safe. And that's one of the things that everyone wants to feel safe. So they create normalcy that feels familiar, which ultimately feels safe. And Bob Dylan's line that you spoke to me earlier today, what was it?
If you want to live outside the law, you got to be honest.
If you want to live outside the law, you got to be honest.
Yeah,
And
it's so good.
if you live outside of normal, you got to be yourself.
Yeah. I think the Ram Dass way of saying that is love everybody and tell the truth.
There you go.
How's
There
that
you
for a
go.
mission?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks
Well,
everybody for tuning in and spending this time with us. It's a great honor and a privilege to share wisdom and insights with Guru Singh and with all of you. And as always, if there are topics that you'd like us to cover, leave them in the comments on YouTube. I go through and read all of those, and we'd be happy to consider one of your suggestions, comments, or questions. And we'd love to see you on the 13 Moons. Once again, you can go to the 13moons.studio, come hang out with us. And anything I missed in there that you want to add before we sign off?
yeah, there's a big part of the 13 moons that is free. And then there's some that's behind a paywall so that we can pay our bills.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone is welcome, whether you can afford something, that's one way, or if you can't afford anything, still join us and be a part of the conversation and feel the connection with community.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, we'll see you all next week, and thanks for listening.
Love you.
Love you.